Okay. Hello and welcome, everyone. And thank you to everyone for joining us today. And we're thrilled to have Pang Yang join us for this talk today. Pang will introduce herself and her work, and so I don't want to say too much, but I think I would be remiss if I didn't mention that Pang is just an amazing educator, a veteran teacher, and was actually named in 2019 Minnesota Teacher of the Year by the Minnesota Council for the Teaching of Languages and Cultures. And so I'm so looking forward to the talk today, and I know many other people are as well. And so before I turn things over to Pang, I just want to make a couple of points about the webinar today. So this webinar is part of a series of community dialogues and educator workshops. And so the previous dialogues you can find on the Center for Holocaust and Genocide Studies YouTube channel. And I would encourage you to take a look at those. They're fascinating conversations with community members. There will be two upcoming educator workshops, one tomorrow evening and one on Wednesday evening, and both will be a space for teachers and pre-service teachers and interested community members and educators to explore ways to think about teaching difficult histories and trauma-informed pedagogies in the classroom. And so I would encourage anyone who's interested to sign up. Again, you can find more information and sign up at the Center for Holocaust and Genocide Studies website. And I'll say that this talk today is co-sponsored by the Center for Holocaust and Genocide Studies and the Department of Curriculum and Instruction here at the University of Minnesota. And so as such, we have a number of participants from the greater Twin Cities community and the greater Minnesota community, and indeed perhaps beyond Minnesota. And then we also have a class of students, pre-service social studies licensure candidates who are joining us today and have read one of Pang's books for an assignment. And so hopefully, we can have a robust conversation about Pang's work and the book itself. And so I would encourage you to put things into the chat as we talk. And it may be difficult. You'll notice that we have two ASL interpreters joining us. And so in order to declutter the screen so that they can be seen, especially as Pang shares some slides with us, I'll turn off my video. And it may be difficult to have participants turn on their videos and cameras or microphones, as that can sometimes clutter the screen. And so I'd encourage people to make use of the chat and add things in, and I'll be monitoring that, and can bring those questions to Pang as we go, and then hopefully towards the end we can have space for a Q&A and some conversation. And so I'm just going to look at my notes and make sure there isn't anything else that I need to mention, but I think that's it. And so with that, I'm just thrilled to have Pang join us, and I'll turn things over to you, Pang.
Thank you so much. I am going to share my screen if I am able to. Let's see. It says host disable attendee share screening.
Okay, so I'll turn that on. There's always one more step, Yes.
Okay, so let me just share my screen. If I can find where my presentation is. All right. All right, so thank you so much this afternoon for joining me in sharing my experience with publication of several books from my students. So like George said, please ask questions in the chat, and then he will help moderate those questions along the way to me. Let's see here. So I am a Hmong American refugee. I came to the United States when I was about 4 years old with my parents. We came because of the Secret War in Laos. My parents ran from the communist Pathet Lao after the fall of the Secret War. And so my family immigrated to America, and we landed in Moline, Illinois, and then came up to Minnesota because many of my relatives were up in Minnesota because of job opportunity. And I am the oldest of 5 children. I wear multiple hats. I have 7 children. Some of them are adults. My oldest is 23, and then my youngest is 7. So I'm very busy with my own children, along with teaching full-time and also wearing a number of different hats in the community. In high school, when I got to my junior and senior year, I had to decide what I wanted to do with my life. And so with a experience in an ESL class, tutoring some of the last wave of Hmong students, I was like, you know, I want to become a teacher, but I had no idea what teaching entailed. And so in 1994, when I was about to graduate from St. Paul Public School, I had the conversation with my mom, and I said, Mom, I'm not going to be the doctor or the lawyer that you want me to be. That's typical of many Asian parents, right? And so I told her, I'm like, I'm going to become a teacher. She's like, great, go for it. And it would be a good fit for you. So I continued my education to Concordia and finished up with my elementary ed licensure. And then I ended up working in Minneapolis Public Schools as a bilingual teacher, and continued at Hamline University to get my bilingual licensure and ESL licensure along with my master's degree at Hamline. And then I had the opportunity to leave Minneapolis and go to Osseo. And the reason why was because my ex-husband and I had purchased a home in Osseo Area School. So I wanted to find out, you know, what the school system was like. So I made the transition there and worked in ESL for a number of years. And then further on my education at St. Mary's University for admin licensure. And so with all my years of teaching, 19 years as an ESL bilingual teacher, and 3 years as a Hmong heritage language teacher. So to set the stage, you know, why Hmong language reclamation preservation work? In the ESL world, it is there's so much opportunities, so much materials. I could have been very comfortable in the ESL world until I retire, but I made this career switch, and much of it has to do with my own experience in the K-12 educational system. I was an English learner for the first 7 years of my life, kindergarten all the way up to 6th grade. And so finally had enough, my scores were finally proficient enough to exit the program. And so as I was growing up in the school system, I encountered a lot of identity crisis. I had to figure out, you know, what does it mean to be an American when I go to school? I'm all Americanized, but when I get home, I have to be this Hmong daughter. And throughout those years, as you know, as I'm transitioning to become a teenager, it was very, very difficult. There was not a space for me to navigate my own identity. And so I also thought about why some students would take Hmong language classes, and it's because of the relationship they want with their grandparents or their parents, because a lot of today's Hmong youths don't have that language anymore. And so they're not able to communicate with their grandparents. And so because of my own personal lived experiences and knowing what some of my Hmong students are going through, I said, you know what, why not take the opportunity and do this and make an impact? Because I know that the Hmong language is on the list of dying off by the end of the century. And so without putting effort into this, I could see that my culture and my language would die off. And so this was important to me. I did hyperlink a paper here that was just recently published by the Coalition of Asian American Leaders in Education Evolving around the work of heritage language preservation and so forth. So if you get a chance, look into that as well. I've also did this for another presentation, and I thought I included this in here because this is a thorough list of all the community and school program, Hmong Heritage Language Program in Minnesota. And so Access St. Paul started in 1998, which I actually taught in that summer school program many, many years ago. And throughout the several decades, more programs have showed up in the public school system, in the communities, in the higher education institution. And most recently, we added our program at Park Center High School in the Osseo School District. So just a nice summary of where we've been with Hmong language heritage work. So where I am employed at, where I work at, is Park Center High School. And as you can look at the demographics here, we are one-third Asian, one-third Black, and then the other third comprised of white, Hispanic, and the other backgrounds. In 2014, a group of Spanish world language teachers got together and they said, you know what, we've noticed a huge difference between our native speakers or our heritage speakers and our non-heritage speakers. Let's do something about it. Let's create a course that will help our heritage speakers fulfill some of those gaps and, you know, work with them differently than our non-heritage speakers. So they created a course and in 2016, in 2016, when it actually came out, the students, my Hmong students I was working with at the time said, wait a minute, what about us? We comprise about over 400 students at the high school. What about us? And I said to them, you know, if you want something, you might have to take action. You might have to speak up. You might have to get your parents involved, the community involved. Because what we know is that less commonly taught languages, it is harder for Hmong and Somali and other languages that are not commonly taught to get those programs up and going. And so the students were like, yeah, of course, we will do what it takes to get a program for us. So we went through a number of different parent meetings, community meetings, along with a larger community meeting with the leadership in our district. And by the end of the summer, my EL coordinator said, Pang, let's write the course proposal, and the rest is history. So we've had Heritage Hmong 1, 2. Last year we added Heritage Hmong 3, which is like social justice, and through a social justice lens, looking at some of the issues that we have in the Hmong community, in our school community, and in the community in general. And then next year we're adding a Heritage Hmong 4, which is really personalized to what the students need. And during this time period, I was also able to advocate and help get the Heritage Vietnamese program started. And so we are starting that program this fall, and it is the very first and only one in the state of Minnesota at the high school level. So super excited about that. So in our Hmong Heritage Program, we do have myself, and we added another teacher last year, a part-time teacher, part-time at Park Center and part-time at Osseo, and then this coming fall, we will have 2 full-time Hmong teachers at Park Center. And so the Hmong Heritage Program is very centered on student-centered learning. It is all about the students, their voices, along with their needs. And we give them a lot of experiences in the community, taking them out, partnering up with the library, partnering up with projects, and we take them out so that they can see the world. and utilize the language at the same time. And it is very life-changing for students. And so the program is really geared towards what the students need, who they are, and where they want to go with their life. We know that with less commonly taught languages, there comes challenges. And with challenges, we know that there's not a lot of curriculum out there for Hmong language. The Hmong languages actually have been oral for the longest time and just written since the 1950s. So there's not a lot of literature out there for Hmong language. And so we're limited in what we have in as curriculum in the classroom. Another challenge that exists as well is intellectual property. As I started my journey teaching Hmong, I had friends who were teaching Hmong in another district, and I said, can you share anything with me just so that I can have a baseline to get started? And every person I asked said, sorry, we can't share anything with you because what we have is intellectual property of the district. We can't share it with you. And so that was very, very difficult as well. And also the teacher licensure piece. There's not like a Hmong language teacher licensure. And so I don't know if throughout the 10 years, if anyone has investigated, but Dr. Jenna Cushing-Libner and I have been working together and, tackling these major challenges. And so we've been able to find out that less commonly teachers can get licensed in world language licensure as well. So, regardless of the challenges that we have to find a way to meet those challenges and to overcome it so that nothing stops us in the way of our journey. Okay, maybe I'll stop right there, and if there's any questions, I will take questions about the first half of the presentation. Any questions so far?
All right, so I can step in, and there have been a couple of questions that have come through already.
Sure.
And so one is a question about why students are so keen to learn Hmong.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I have 175 students that I have on my caseload, and that's the first thing I ask them in class, my community building week. Why are you in here? And majority, about 98% of students want to be in there because there's something that's missing out of their education that hasn't been fulfilled. Some students have gone through our charter schools and they love the language and the culture and they want to continue to grow it. Some have never been exposed to Hmong language and culture. So we have, of the 175 students, I would say probably about 40% of students have very limited Hmong or have never had any Hmong literacy course. And then we have a good 40% of students who have some Hmong. Maybe they learned it through karaoke, maybe they picked it up here and there with their family, and then about 20% of students who are pretty advanced in their language proficiency because they've gone to a charter school or they've had experience picking up the language at their home environment. So kids come to the class because they want to come. Some kids want to come because of their grandparents. They want to be able to talk to their grandparents and have a better relationship with their parents because their parents don't speak English. And so throughout that journey, there are some grandparents who they lose along the way. And they know that it's just a matter of time before those relationships are gone forever.
And then maybe a follow-up to that is, so the classes that you teach, Pang, are they open to any student, or is it just Hmong students that tend to take them? Or are there maybe non-Hmong students that would be interested or would enroll?
Currently right now we are, it's a heritage program. And so we're only opening up to students who are native speakers or heritage speakers. Sometime in the near future, we would love to incorporate like a college in the school course that Professor Vang at the university has. So sometime in the long run, we'd love to open it up to other students who are interested in learning how to speak, read, write Hmong. Yes.
And then there's one more question that came through, and I'm not sure how much you'd be able to speak to this, but I think people are interested in this idea of curriculum being the intellectual property of school districts. And so you mentioned this being one of the challenges, that Hmong curriculum that has been developed in other places. And so I wonder if you could talk to, is that common, or, is it something particular perhaps to, less commonly taught languages, or, curricula that is a little more specialized, like say Hmong language curricula?
Mhm. I think it's from district to district to program to program. I can't speak for everyone, but I know like in St. Paul, um, I don't know about the other less commonly taught languages in St. Paul, but I know specifically the Hmong language that it is intellectual property. They can't share anything with me. I actually, because of that, I actually went all the way down to Sacramento and found my mentors. They Patrick Vang and Yap Otsha. They actually have the longest standing Hmong heritage high school language program in the country, close to 20 years. And so I actually went all the way down there and I said, "Can you share anything with me?" "Yes, whatever you want. Let us know. We are here for you." So it is really district to district. And you just got to ask, and just even if like when people kept on saying no, no, no to me, I just kept on searching and searching. I said, somebody will say yes. Somebody will hold my hands. Yeah.
Maybe I'd ask my own question here. I'm interested because I think, this idea that you're doing this, seemingly alone, right? You're, a teacher who's teaching a course where you don't have necessarily colleagues in the same building teaching the same content to go and share ideas and seek inspiration. But I mean, the idea that you would go and find colleagues around the country that are doing this. And I wonder if I could ask just about that, like supports that, and you've mentioned curriculum, coming from places in California, but I wonder about the community. Has the Hmong community in the Twin Cities been receptive and supportive of this work? And
Hmm. Um, I think at the school, I think a lot of parents are very supportive and they want their kids to take the class. In the community, they're excited about it. Everywhere I go, and we're sharing our story, our journey with them, and they seem to be pretty excited about what we're doing and hoping that it continues to grow in other places. And so I believe there is support there. I think you have to tell your story and you have to meet the right people. And if people don't support you, just keep on going. I just don't let people who don't have what I need just let me down. And so if you can't help me with what I need, I'll just keep on going and meet somebody else, and I'll just keep on asking. So I'm not afraid to ask, and I'm not afraid for people to reject me. It's just that if I don't ask, I will never know. So.
yeah, yeah, no, great advice. Yeah, well, maybe with that, I'll turn it back over to you, and then as questions come up, I can pop in.
Definitely. I actually did miss key information. I actually, when I was teaching ESL at the high school, I actually taught social studies, did a collaboration with the social studies teachers for about 6 to 7 years. And through that time period, we worked together and we co-taught social studies. Even though social study was like my less favorite content area, it was one that I could develop, grow in and learn and help the social studies teacher become a more rounded teacher and help her increase her knowledge in the secret war and so forth. So that also is, that's where my lens is also coming from. So a little bit about my own writing journey. So that you can also see where I'm coming from. When I was growing up in the K-12 school system, I never saw myself reflected in the curriculum and in books. Every book that I opened up, and I hated reading because I didn't see myself. I didn't see my purpose for reading because I didn't see people who looked like me, and I didn't see my story reflected in that. And so as I journey on to high school, I was in AP English and AP classes and everything, but that really did not prepare me to write, write in college. So my first couple years in college, with all my English classes and all my other writing papers. I ended up, spending hours and hours in the college writing center. And I invested that time. I'm like, I can't become a teacher if I can't write. And so I spent a huge chunk of time writing and helping those amazing tutors, helping me see and understand verb tenses and help me understand how to, how not to repeat myself so much, right? And so I started to learn how to write and become a better writer. And before that, I really didn't see my purpose. And as I journeyed through becoming a teacher, as I finished up the last 5-6 years of my ESL experience, I started seeing that I had a story to tell, because through some of the courageous conversation equity work that we did in my district, I started to unpack my racial autobiography, all the things that was going on in my life in terms of race. And I started to come out of my shell because I really didn't have a voice ever since before that. And I kept a lot of things inside of myself, or I would never speak up at a staff meeting and so forth. But it really kind of opened me up and say, you know what, I have a story to tell. And why not tell it to my students? Why am I hiding this from my students? I think my experiences can help my students go farther in life. So I started to change my own storytelling experience in my classroom. And then in 2017, where we were going to start our program, Dr. Jenna Cushing-Libner had set up a meeting with the Hmong Archives, and Dr. Brian Shung was there too, and he was one of the board members. And I met him, and he said, Pang, let's have coffee. And we had a coffee, and he said, you know what, I am starting an organization, a business to allow people, Hmong people, to produce books and resources, because there's hardly anything out there. I'm like, really? I'm like, that would be so amazing. So after our conversation, I went back and my brain started, turning and thinking, what could this look like for my classroom? And so I had to kind of find out my purpose, and my purpose for having my students write. And so when I did a survey with students about reading in general, majority of my Hmong students don't like to read, similar to me, because they didn't see themselves reflected in the curriculum. Many of them don't have books that are written in Hmong at home. So I'm thinking, well, if they don't have books written in Hmong at home, how could we continue to promote their literacy at home, right? And then also, many of them, they don't have that literacy background because they've never been exposed or taught it. So that was also all the survey responses that I got was kind of set the stage of why I would go this, put this much effort into this project for my students. And so my literacy coach, I have lots of coaches. I always ask for help because I'm like, I can't do this by myself. So I have a literacy coach who works with me every week, and she came in, I'm like, let's write a grant. So we went to our union, our state union, Education Minnesota Foundation. When you become a teacher, and you're a union member, you donate $5 to the Education Minnesota Foundation, and they give grants to teachers. They give grants to professional development, so forth. And so they have these classroom grants for up to $3,000. And I said, let's write it. So we wrote the grant, and the grant was really, one, to pay for an artist to come in and do some identity work with my students, and then two, to publish books. And it really didn't cost anything to publish with her publisher, but my goal is to get books that students write into their hands, so that they could have a copy of their own book. So that's where the grant money went into. So if George shares this Google site with you, the hyperlink here will take you to my grant that Lori and I wrote together, so you could see it. But we came up with, actually I had 6 ideas in terms of books. I didn't even know how much it would cost to publish. And so I went with 3 of the 6 ideas. So the book Farthest to the Right, From Mountains to 10,000 Lakes, that one was actually with an artist residency, hip hop artist residency with Tusai Lee. And so he came in and did a week-long residency with kids. And at the end, the kids wrote poetries about their life experiences. And he selected the poems to be published in the book. The poems some are written in Hmong, some are written in Monglish, and some are written in English. I said, write it in the language you feel most comfortable in speaking about your experience. And then the book to the farthest left, The Cultural Dish, was a collaboration with the FACS teacher, the cooking teacher at my school. And so we had Chef Vang, who was just a rising chef at the time. And we had seen him on Facebook and social media, and we called him. I messaged him one day. I was like, would you come talk to my kids? And he's like, sure. So he came and inspired our cooking students and our Hmong students. And he told the story around behind every dish, there's a story. And so after he inspired students, 3 months later, he came back and he did some cooking demonstration, cooking kimchi fried rice with it. But what the cooking teacher did was she took his idea and she actually made her students cook some Hmong food in her class. But for my Hmong class, my Heritage Hmong class, I turned it into an assignment. So instead of having any ordinary assignment, I have assignments that's directly connected to books that we'll publish. So it's meaningful. So for this assignment, I said, pick your back to that first time you had it. I don't care how old you are, how old you were, right? Go back to that first time when you had it. What was it like? Where was it? And describe and tell it to us. So we have a whole bunch of stories, narratives around those favorite dish. No recipes in the book. But I also asked my colleagues who were teaching Heritage Spanish to include their Spanish food poems. So the cultural dish do have some Spanish food poems that were written by students as well, and there is in the book too. And then I try to make everything, the whole process, very student-centered, because I believe that these books are the students' books. It's not my book, it's the students' book, it belongs to them. So even the cultural dish, the students selected the name, they generated ideas, and then the kids voted on it. And the back cover of the cultural dish, a student who was taking computer art at Hmong did that work for the back cover. And then so it's like some of the stories, like in the cultural dish, those were chosen by students. I didn't choose which stories would get in it. I printed all the stories and I let the students read and they make the selections. So we try to make it as student-centered friendly as possible. So the process for me in order to complete this work, her publisher is not traditional publisher. I did not pay money just to get my books, just to get the students' books to be published. They don't make money off of the books that we publish. And so they're very non-traditional publishers. So what I did was I worked with Ryan. I submitted my manuscript, and they have designers who would create the layout to make sure that the inside looked Hmong. They even have illustrators, etc. So whatever I needed, they could fulfill. Now, like with the Mountains to 10,000 Lakes, for that book, the photos in there are actually student-generated photos, artwork. And so instead of having it outsourced to another artist, I said, you know what, my students are so artistic, why not let them do it, right? So that was also student-centered as well. And then Ryan and I would continue to edit the book multiple times. And then finally, when we came to the final the final edit, we would sign a contract, and then he said, okay, this is how much it would cost. And then your book will be here. Your books will be here in a month or so. With a grant, I cannot make money off of these books. And so they are sold for as cheap as you can get through the publishers. So we don't make any profits with the books. Okay. And talking a little bit more about the Dear My Teacher book. This book is very, very special because this is actually an idea I took from online that I saw, because I'm like, you know what? I went from literally 60 students that I had in my ESL classes to 175. I literally tripled the number of students I saw on a daily basis. How can I develop relationship with them? How can I get my Hmong students to trust me? You know, and so I saw this idea of a teacher having students write letters to her. And I'm like, you know what? I want to try that. And so I did the first year. I learned so much about my students, and the students who sit in my classrooms are 1.5 to 3.0 generations. They are students who came in the last wave of Hmong students in the mid 2000s, all the way up to students whose grandparents were the refugees who came in as refugees. And so we had an array of different generational students in my classroom, and I wanted to know from them. So the letter, when I asked them to write, I said, I want you to write a letter to me so that I know where you're coming from and that I can better support you. And so when the letters came in, they were so heartbreaking. There were some letters that I literally just cried and cried and cried. I'm like, oh my God, I can't believe this. This is the first time this is surfacing for you, and so forth. And mental health seemed to be a huge theme that came out, and I had second thoughts. I was talking to my publisher. I'm like, I'm not sure if I want to publish these letters because they're so deep. And we thought about it, and then I'm like, you know what? Maybe we can publish them anonymously, because I don't think students will allow me to publish it with their names. So we went with anonymous letters, and all the names at the end of the letters, those are actually generated by me, because after I read the letter, I'm like, I signed it a nickname so that it would be anonymous. And so we published it, and I can't tell you how many times I've taken these letters out and read them throughout the year, because at the beginning of the year, I don't even know who Mai is. I have no idea. I know her story. I don't have a face to a name yet. By the middle of the year, or by November, I have an idea who Mai is. Let me read her story a little bit more, make some connection. Oh, now I know that I'm going to ask her about her grandpa, how her grandpa's doing, because he was sick in September. Now I have a starting point to develop a relationship, to deepen a conversation with students. And all the students who had mentioned mental health, some mental health issues in there, I did a lot of work with counselors and with social workers, and with their parents, and addressing the mental health component. And also worked with last summer, one of my students who was not, his letter was not published in the book. He he was very suicidal, and he took his own life. And so I was devastated. And so I got together a group of Hmong professionals and artists, and I said, what can we do about this? Last year we had about over half a dozen Hmong students in the Twin Cities alone take their lives. And I said, I can't live with this scenario anymore. We can do better. So we started the Project Chandu project. And so there's also a hyperlink for that as well. And so because of this book, because of learning about all the things that students are going through, and they're not new things compared to what I've gone through. They may be a little bit different because of the technological changes, but there are really a lot of things that I dealt with as a young student. And so the book really has opened up parents and staff eyes. And even my principal, after she read it, she was in tears. And I really do feel like after she read it, I do felt that she has a different empathy level for Hmong students, because sometimes we could say, oh, Hmong students are doing fine, they're passing all their courses and they're graduating, but really, if you dig deeper, if you disaggregate the data and you dig deeper, there's a lot of things that are silently surfacing and it's not being addressed. So really opened up the parents' eyes, staff eyes, and one parent said, hey, where's your story? And the student said, Mom, you have to read the whole book to find out. And so the mom read the whole book, and the mom couldn't tell which was her daughter's story. And so sometimes I think, you know, when students say, Miss Yang, you know us more than our parents, I really want, you know, parents to read this and say, you know what, how can I deepen my relationship with my child? Because I can't just let them go at it alone. And so the results has also brought a lot of confidence in students. Being able to tell your story anonymously and throw it out to the world and not ever have to carry it on your shoulder was huge. And in the book, you read my story, my letter of what I carried with me for so long. And for some students, it was a relief for them just to be able to get it off their chest and to be able to let it go. Okay. So, is this easy? No, it's not easy. Each book probably roughly took me more than 50 hours of work. I do have my literacy coach come in and do some edits with students, a one-on-one edit with them, and then I do edit the Hmong stories themselves. But it does take a lot of time outside of teaching. And I don't make $1 million, students. We don't make any money, any profit off of this because it is grant funded. Here's Emily. Emily is one of my students who is actually a published author in all 3 books. And throughout the books, I tell kids, if you don't get your story published in one book, it might be another book. But Emily is one of our few students who have her stories published in all 3 books as well. So it feels, you know, for students, it's like, it feels so great just to be so young and to be able to publish something that's so real. We've hosted some read alouds in the community for students so that they can continue to grow their confidence, their voice. We've also hosted an event where I wrote another grant, and we brought in Hmong authors from across the country, from Hawaii, from California, Texas, all over, to come and inspire students in the community, and really had a good time with learning from the different authors, etc. So that was very successful as well. At the end, and if I think about, you know, is this all worth it? And I think about the amount of work it takes and everything, and you know, I see it totally worth it when I know that if I don't do anything, possibly my language could die off in the next, by the end of the century or in the next couple of decades. So why not? Why not contribute to something that is going to be long lasting and worthwhile? So in the future, if you're curious about what it looks like, I did renew my grant and I was awarded again to publish more books. And so we have these books coming up in the next school year. We will be publishing it. We want to really take a look at how Hmong youths, what's their perspective in terms of Black Lives Matters, how they see race, and how does this all fit into it? Because with what's happened with George Floyd in the community, there's been a lot of discussion within the Hmong community and a great big divide in terms of the racial discussion. And so we would like to get someone to come in and an artist to come in and have these deep discussions and have students write about their own racial experience and how, you know, what does Black Lives Matter have to do with me? And so, and then also with the cultural dish, we've had a lot of responses that people want recipes. And some of this food in the cultural dish, they're not really authentic because la, which is the beef salad, is actually Lao. It's not Hmong. And so with this second book, it is going to be truly just Hmong dishes. with the recipes and the stories. And so a lot of the food that was featured in the cultural dish, they are food that we have adopted everywhere we lived, from China to Laos to Thailand to Vietnam to the United States. And so this one will be an original. And then a third book, Mokot Liro Ku Memblong Sha, which is a book of a variety of different students' stories that have been collected over the years. And so, and I'm also working on publishing a couple of children's books as well. Any questions? I'm gonna stop screen sharing. So if there's any questions or discussions, we definitely can have that as well.
All right, thanks so much, Peng. That was amazing, and I can't wait to read these next books that are coming up. So a couple of questions just while we wait for more to come in, and so I'd encourage people to add questions to the chat. But one, that is kind of me thinking here, that you start by telling your story, and a lot of it has to do with language. But then by the end, there seems to be less to do with language and more with, things like ethnic studies, or you mentioned several times, these kind of arts-based approaches. And, which really gets me thinking. And I wonder if you could talk about, how you see, kind of things like ethnic studies, maybe, or arts-based approaches as, informing the work that you do with your students.
Mm-hmm. With the ethnic studies piece, I am on another committee working on ethnic studies as well. But when I took Jenna's course at Carly Institute to prepare for my Hmong 3, which is using the YPAR curriculum, the youth-led anticipatory action research, that really resonated with me and with students, because a lot of times we often talk about issues that we're having in the Hmong culture, gender issues with patriarchy, issues with this, issues with that. And it's like, what do we do? And by Hmong 3, let's do something. Let's do some action research. Let's set the stage up so that you have the background knowledge, and let's take some action. And so that's where it gets pretty exciting with the Hmong 3 course. In terms of the art space, I often know that when I was teaching ESL students, this journey really has changed me as a teacher. I was not this kind of teacher when I was teaching ESL, because teaching Hmong language really got me outside of my comfort zone, outside of the box. And so when I realized that I have to, if kids don't really like to read, I better find a way for them to like to read, or help them find that purpose. And so by publishing, students are like, wait a minute, I've never read a book, and that's the first book I've read, and I loved every single poem that I read in that book. Wow, that's awesome. And to think about so many of the artistic skills that Hmong students have, they love singing, they love creating this and creating that. I'm like, why not utilize, change it into a strengths-based program where we're utilizing students' strengths and what they're really good at, and allow them opportunity to grow. So instead of, a long time ago, when I was doing ESL, used to be, okay, we're doing 60, everyone's doing a research paper, so that's 60 research papers to grade. And that was like, oh my God. But now, I don't force kids to do research papers anymore. I'm like, nope. With student-centered learning and helping students find who they are, love who they are, take the strength of what they're good at, and I allow them for a lot of choices. So students, for example, I have a group of students whose parents was a band back when I was in high school, and now their children have grown up, and I'm like, and they love to sing. I'm like, where are your albums? Oh, we have one song. And so in the 2 years that they've been with me, they've been developing all these songs, and these songs come right from the curriculum. It's like they get a grade for their for their song or video creation, but then at the same time, they're contributing to their community and they're contributing to their talent and they're showcasing it. And it's taken their own life experience in high school to a different level. So I always think about, you know what? I am not an artist at all. I can't even draw, seriously. But I know that students know how to do things that I don't know. And if I allow them to run with it, they will take it very, very far. And it's just a matter of me letting go of all the things that I'm like, oh, I can't let go, I can't let go. And now I just said, nope, I'm gonna let it go. And when I do, I can see students flourish so much. Like some of the students who have been with me in Hmong 1, I would, they're super, super quiet, and there's, you know, other leaders in the classroom, they're talking a lot. And then after all those graduate, and now they get to Hmong 3, wow. I cannot tell you how many students I've seen that have been this really, really quiet kid as a freshman, and they've been not outspoken, and now, wow, they've come out of their shell and they're utilizing a lot of their strengths in class. And it's just amazing to see students grow because I allow them to grow, and I create a safe space for them to be who they want to be without judging them. Because I have 5 teenagers, adult/teenagers too. So I really have to be able to see their perspective and understand them and not be judgmental as well.
No, I love that. And I think just highlighting the power of student-centered learning. Yeah, and I also like that you kind of mentioned that you didn't start out this way. You know, it wasn't your first year of teaching and you're doing this revolutionary, amazing work, that it's a journey, right? And, you know, I think that's good to remind ourselves. I wonder if you could talk about, I mean, especially the Dear My Teacher and the vulnerability that you talked about, and certainly comes through in the book. And, you know, for students to share what they shared, you know, I wonder if you could talk about some of the community building that you do with your students in your classes that, you know, kind of gets them to the point where a book like this would even be, you know, something that you could do in a class.
Mm-hmm. The vulnerability piece was very difficult for me. And when I came to the high school about in 1998, when I came to the high school, I was not at all ready to be vulnerable with my students. I had just, my ex-husband and I had just divorced. I was going through a lot of things. It was just like not the right time. And so I think time is crucial. You have to be ready in your life to be vulnerable to students. And I had, at a point of time, I often thought about, why am I keeping all this to myself? When if I can tell my story so students don't get married at 19, man, they would have a great life. Or if they don't have to make the decisions that I made, man, I think life would be so much better. And so my first vulnerability, you know, after we've had the courageous conversation training and I started unpacking my racial luggage and everything, the first vulnerability for me was my own son, who, my last child, who has cleft lip and palate. And so when I had him, I wasn't able to share with my students, but as time came on and I was so much more ready, I actually shared that in class, and it was very emotional. I was crying and everything because it was the first time I had shared it. And I shared it with my ESL student at the time, and I said, this is why you need to learn English. I helped them see how learning English connects to the obstacles I was having in life. And I was telling them that, you know, without me having enough English and doing research on my own, I would have to rely on an interpreter who may not even interpret my needs to the doctor. And so that's why you need to learn English, and you need to learn how to research. You need all these skills, because in life, you might not have a child who has cleft lip and palate, but what if your uncle, what if your grandma goes into the hospital and you're the one that they're counting on? And so when I share my life vulnerability experiences with students, I set the stage to help them see why my classes, how learning English is connected to their own life. And that was one of the first time I shared it. And the students were like, oh my God, Miss Yang, they were crying with me. And I'm like, this isn't that bad. You know, they're humans too. They understand. They're not like second graders. They understand. So I started continuing to share that. And then when I started teaching Hmong, I started to share about my dad, my experience as a high school student, having my dad marry an international bride when I was 17 or 16 and she was younger than me. And so I started talking about these really harsh things that has happened to me. And kids were like, man, that's my life. That's me. So or that's my grandma, or that's my grandpa. So they started connecting to me, and we cry sometimes in class, and it's okay because it does get emotional and things like that. But, and then and then little by little, I share what I'm comfortable with to kind of start opening the door so that they could see that I'm only human. Yep. And I tell them my philosophy in class, I am not your teacher. I'm only human like you. I'm just 20 plus years older than you are. But we're all learning this together because Miss Yang does not have an answer to that Hmong question that you're asking, because I'm learning with you. We're learning together. And by me sharing my story with you, I hope that you never make the mistake that I did. Getting married at 19, running away from my family because of what was happening, and getting married. And then 15 years later, finding out that I hate being this Hmong woman who was always living under my ex-husband's control. And so we start talking about patriarchal, we start talking about gender, we start talking about so many things, and the kids are like, man, this is the only place I could be myself. And so that's where we started having kids to open up. And I actually, at first, I kind of waited longer to share my life experience, to be vulnerable with students. But now I share the first week. The first week, I start right on it. And then once I do that, I assign this assignment by the end of the first week. And I tell students, you don't have to tell me anything you don't want to. And your letter is totally confidential, unless it's something that I need to talk to your counselor or your parents about. And I do it in a way where I've learned how to acquire how to talk to parents about mental health, how to educate counselors and social workers about mental health in the Hmong community. And so I've learned all of that throughout the years with experience. And so building this trust with students is super important. And that's where I can get them to open up. But if I don't share anything about myself, I won't get the letters that I really need to know more about the students.
Yeah, no, I'm hanging on your every word. There are a few more questions that have come in. So one is asking if you could talk about what happened after the book. So as students are reading each other's letters and, what happened not only in the class and with the students, but in the larger school, the community, as, the book makes its rounds and people become more aware of it and are able to read these stories, in some cases for the first time, perhaps.
Mm-hmm. Well, the students are super excited whenever they're a published author in a book. They're like, I got my book, and so they're very, very, very excited. We actually haven't made time to read the books in the classroom, but I used it as a text for the following year. So this past fall, I actually had my students open up Dear My Teacher and read some of the stories and see if they could connect to the stories and so forth. And so I I use the text in my classroom as a part of what I need to do. to make those connections and to have more culturally relevant texts for students to read during free reading time, right? We've done some read alouds in the community. We've also done read alouds at school. So making egg rolls and food for the teachers, just come in and listen to students read. They don't have to buy a book. We do market the book to teachers, say, please, if you want to know more about your quiet, your silent students, your silent Hmong students in your classroom, read this book. And for a lot of teachers who read it, it was hard for them. And, you know, they feel guilty of not giving attention to these quiet students, even though there were, you know, a million things going on in their lives. And so by doing this, I think it really opened up teachers' eyes as well and helped them see a different perspective. And just because you're, yeah, the student's visible doesn't mean they don't have a story to tell. They do. But how do you you know, break that conversation piece? You know, we always, with time, we always try to find students to read. And when we do the read alouds, there's some students who are like, Miss Yang, I'm not reading. I'm like, okay, sure, you don't have to read. I'll take volunteers. And then at the end, they're like, I want to read. And they're all up on the, you know, they're all up on the stools and they're all reading. And so it brings a lot of confidence, and the kids feel great. And some of the kids have, like Emily, who I put in the slideshow, she came in not having any Hmong at all. No written or literacy in Hmong, and she didn't even speak Hmong. And within 2 years, voila, she was at the intermediate low level, and she received a certificate on her bilingual assessment. And so really doing all this, publishing all these books really have given a purpose to writing in class. It's not just like, oh, we're just writing for the sake of writing. We're writing because there's a story to tell, and we have good stories to tell. And so what else did I miss? I know sometimes I go off tangent.
No, this is fantastic. Yeah, so I wonder a couple of questions about, and maybe I'd ask them at the same time. So one is about collaboration with other colleagues, other disciplines, and then one is, you know, kind of thinking, you know, how teachers outside of, so thinking about social studies teachers or white teachers, how they could support the work that you're doing or similar work, or, you know, hopefully inspire and take on some of this work perhaps in their own way, in their own classrooms, you know, in the future.
Like I said, with every book, there's a collaboration to go with it, because I believe in the power of collaboration. And so anytime we can get another teacher, another subject area to collaborate, that's key. So I'm huge on collaboration. I love collaboration. And then how can other teachers support this work? I would say purchase a set for your classroom. I don't think, if kids can get their hands on it, I think they're more likely to open it up and read it. Because at the event that we had, the Hmong authors event, where we had like a dozen authors from all over the country, we gave out probably close to $1,000 worth of free books, and students actually took it home and read it. I'm like, wow, you read it? I read it from the front cover to the bottom, to the end cover. I'm like, whoa, great, it was awesome. So I think having it visible in the classroom, and even if you don't read from the expert, just mentioning it. Oh, well, here are some books from, you know, that is related to this. Here's some books. So just having a classroom library helps as well. And I would say, because I work with Margaret, my social studies colleague for 6-7 years, and it is difficult to develop relationship with 175 to 200 students. So I would say adapt this letter to your content area. Okay, write a letter. Tell me the history of your family, and you will be like, wait a minute, oh my God, I didn't even know so-and-so is brothers or cousins to so-and-so. Oh my God. You would learn so much from it. And I think a lot of teachers I think they're afraid of what might be disclosed in the letter. And I would say, yes, be afraid, but at least you know it, and you could inform the counselor, inform the social worker to take the next step. You don't have to take that next step, but that's their job. And by doing that, then you can focus on the student and their need and their story, and allowing them time to share their story in class if they're comfortable. But if you do create a space where all voices are welcome, then students will be much more welcome. In my classroom, I also do circles. And circles are very powerful. Always have a talking piece and protocols in place, and to create that safe space. And students are never forced to talk. They can always pass, but being in a circle allows students to focus, allows students to listen, and allows students to tell their story. And so I do that more often than I used to when I was teaching ESL students. Mm-hmm.
So there are a couple of other questions, but I'm thinking, I wonder if you would have advice on how to, maybe like foster a like multilingual classroom. I think, so many colleagues, and, I would put myself in this boat as a teacher, this idea that I, was often very uncomfortable with students speaking languages in my classroom that I didn't also speak. And, I wonder if you have advice, and I know you're working in a context where of course you speak the language, and you're teaching Hmong, but I wonder if you have advice, and thinking back also to your ESL days, thinking about, like how to create a multilingual space and foster kind of a multilingual space, and, how important that would be for students in many cases.
Yeah, I think anytime you have the opportunity of students who speak the same language, to get them together and talk about what they're learning. I know students have said, Miss Yang, why did you tell us to speak English and you didn't tell the other group? And this is a group of Latino students, and I said, you know what? I don't know what you're talking about, but when you're not on task, I surely do know. And they're like, oh yeah, Miss Yang, you're right. So they're like, yeah. But I like I tell kids, I don't mind what language you're using as long as you are on task and you are doing what we're asking you to do. Because what's most important is, do you understand the content? Does your partner need help understanding the content? And being able to converse in the language that's most comfortable is key. Like even I've been keeping track of students, long-term English learners, Hmong students who have been born in the United States and have come through the school system, and they're still in EL programs in high school. I've been keeping track of that, of students in that scenario, and I'm like, does this class really help them? And throughout the number of years, I see a larger group of students who are taking both Hmong and English, and I'm seeing them exit the EL program because their scores are high enough in the different modalities. And I think I attribute it to, because one, they're for those who are more proficient in Hmong, they're actually understanding and utilizing their Hmong for the very first time and utilizing that. And so they exit out of EL programs. Or two, students who have never, who are long-term Hmong EL students, they've never been able to connect to their identity and their heritage and their language. And now it's like, oh my God, this is a missing piece in my life. And we're addressing mental health. We're talking about mental health. We talk about it openly in my class, about mental health, depression, and suicide, because I've created that safe space. And I think it's because of combination of being able to read stories, listen to stories, and laugh and talk and ask all these questions that are no longer stupid questions in any place. And to be able to read like a novel that is even extremely hard, but be able to listen to it and finally understand why things are the way they are, it really engages students to a different level of than what I see in the different content area. So I've seen that, you know, students do make a lot more progress being in my class and in the EL program, and eventually being able to exit. So I've seen some positive things happen with that as well.
I really appreciate that as we move forward with our class for the students that are, you know, my social studies students who are joining us. This is one of the things that we'll wrestle with is language in the classroom. And so I really, yeah, I really appreciate you speaking to that. So I'll just, we're getting closer to the end here, and I'll just make a call for any questions. And I know there are a couple that we haven't addressed, but if there are more, right, to add them into the chat. So one question is about resources. And I think for people who are interested in reading and learning more about, you know, maybe as a teacher about the Hmong American experience or Hmong history, but then also if there may be resources that you use, you know, aside from the ones that you're creating yourself that, you know, are impactful for students that you would recommend.
I can get a list for you, and then you could share with,
Yeah, no, that would be fantastic. Yeah, yeah, yeah. And then there are a couple of other questions. So one is just about you and maybe your background a little bit, and you know what other speaking you've done and where you've shared this work. You know, just in over the last few years.
My problem is that I'm not good at saying no. So it's like, okay, I'll say yes. And you know what, Jenna, too, that she gives us so many opportunities to grow. And I wouldn't be the speaker I am today without her providing a lot of opportunities. We do share this work, or my colleagues and I share our work at, you know, like Minnesota Council of Teaching and Language and Culture conferences, the Central State conferences. I share it and anywhere and everywhere I go. And anyone who requested, I also do speak, you know, about the experience. We've done some webinars within the community that, because a lot of people are like, Pang, do you really publish it for nothing out of your pocket? I'm like, yes, I do not pay Brian a single penny to publish. The grants that I write are for the students, for my students to get their free book. Although I do spend a lot of money outside my pocket, or I do just to get additional books or write additional grants or beg for additional money because I underestimated how much it would cost. But yeah, anywhere and everywhere, I will continue to share and inspire folks to, you know, listen to stories.
Yeah, yeah, no, so a couple of questions, and you know, I think as we get closer to the end here. So one is if you have advice for teachers to help support refugee students, Hmong or otherwise, you know, especially students who have come midway through their schooling experience.
So advice to support students and families. I would say, I think one of the things that I see content teachers that they are afraid to do is to reach out and use language line, use an interpreter, use a bilingual assistant, use somebody who speaks the language, and don't be afraid to call home. Because I think some teachers are so afraid, oh, I don't know how this even works. Talk to your ESL staff at school, whatever system you have. You know, I think parents love hearing from school, and like, you know, in developing any kind of relationship, don't wait until it's a negative, you know, thing for you to call when you have good things to tell about, you know, about the student. And the more positivity you can bring, and just to, if parents are doing something well at home, let them know as well too. I think sometimes not hearing from any teacher is like, wait a minute, how come I haven't heard from anybody? But just being that person to continue to develop that relationship with the family. And at the end of the day, you know, I think of my own family's experience coming through the school system. And, you know, at the end of the day, my parents didn't know anything about the school system, navigating nothing. And it was really for me to figure that out. And for now, as a teacher, I'm thinking, well, you know, times have changed. There are some parents who still don't know much because they're older. But there are some parents that are like my age. They might know, have some experience, but they might not know at all. But it's always okay to ask if they, you know, if they need additional support and what you can do to, maybe it's just a connection that they need. Maybe it's just an email that they need, or, you know, whatever you can do to support them as parents and so forth. Because I think a lot of our Hmong parents do rely on the educators in the system to help their children go to wherever they need to go. And so there's a lot of faith in teachers.
Yeah, no, exactly. So just a couple of last questions here. So one is asking about you again and sharing your experiences and your story with students. And if you ever felt pressure to kind of share your story in a particular way. And so I think the question is kind of getting at, you know, how to be genuine in the classroom, but also, you know, recognizing that you're working with groups of students and, you know, who have their own particular needs and desires and, you know, things that are off limits sharing and, you know, I guess things in that line.
I think I only share because I'm comfortable. And I know that sharing at the very beginning was very emotional for me, but I know that it is a part of my journey to heal, because I also am healing from all the things that have been happening in my own life. And so I don't think, if kids asked a question, I would answer them. Do I share every single detail of my life? No. But for the students who come to me and say, and personally come to say, and, you know, say, Miss Yang, my life is very similar. I'm going through this. I just need, you know, some advice. I probably share a little bit deeper with them at a, you know, on a one-on-one time after school with them to kind of troubleshoot what's happening and be that cultural navigator to help with their situation. But I don't think I'm ever, if the kids ask, I will answer, but I usually don't tell all the details. It's just very surface level. But it is, my life is quite, it's like a drama series, if you call it. So it is interesting for kids to hear my life story, but yeah.
No, I appreciate that. And I think it's, you know, for people who are starting out, right, this balance of what to share and how and when. And yeah, absolutely. I guess maybe, you know, just as we're winding down here, I'd love just to ask one more question, and it's a little bit unfair, but it's just if there's other, and I know you've been here with us almost an hour and a half sharing, you know, tons of invaluable, just amazing advice. But I wonder if there's other advice, especially thinking of yourself as a, you know, a newer teacher. And, you know, I know when you first logged in, we were, you know, just chatting a little bit about licensure programs and, you know, what we wish we knew then and things like that. And I wonder if you have any advice for teachers kind of starting out this year?
I think I felt like the last 3 years I was a brand new teacher again, but this time around, I think because I took a different route, I took the student center route. I think I worked so much harder than my first year of teaching, and I felt that I got what I wanted. I saw the results that I wanted to see. So for teachers who are starting new this fall, center around your students. It's the students in class. That's why you are there for them, right? Center the learning around them and what they need and what they're looking for. Because I always think about my students as customers. If they're not happy, they're not going to return to my class. They're going to be like, what the heck, Miss Yang? But then if they're happy and if I fulfill what they're missing in their other classes, they will want to come back. And even if coming back is not just for a literacy purpose, maybe coming back is to feel loved, to feel like it's home for them, to feel like whatever way. That's where I know that I will have accomplished something with them, right? And so center your learning around students. Give a part of you to them. A lot of times it's my own children. They're like, yeah, the only thing we know about our teacher is content. We have no idea what about that they're human. We're human just like the kids. It's okay to make mistakes. It's okay to be vulnerable. It's okay to say I don't know. And that's why I think I make it so clear in my classes that I don't know all the answers that you're looking for. I'm still learning with you. And it's okay if we learn together.
It's just amazing. I think that's an amazing point to end on. And so I'll just say, I just, you know, there's people kind of expressing thanks in the chat as well. And so, but thank you so much from me and from everyone that helped to organize this and certainly from my students as well. I mean, this has just been an amazing conversation. And so I guess before we sign off today, I'd just like to thank Nicole and Maria for their ASL interpretation and Joe for support. And I'll say to my students, if you're still with us, that we'll obviously spend part of Wednesday's class talking through some of this in more detail. But thank you so much for joining us today. And Pang, thank you so much for taking the time. And I know you're busy and you can't say no. And so I really appreciate you joining us and you know, sharing just, you know, such amazing you know, experiences from your own work as an educator. So.
Sounds good. Thank you so much. And I am going on vacation, so I'll send those to you next week, sometime next week. Thank you.
Great. Yep. Bye.
Bye.